Yes, I am so glad. I was actually going to be in Haiti, and we had this terrible hurricane, Matthew. From August to November, we have hurricanes pretty much in Haiti and all across the Caribbean, and they're always awful destructive. The Bible talks about the winds and waves roaring, and so many last day signs are here among us in this hour. And it's a time for the church to be strong in the Lord and the power of His might. And I've promised the Lord I'm going to intensify my prayer life and my dedication. I want Him to have all of me, and if there's any part that's left, I want Him to have. I talked to Mary, my wife, as she was passing. I said, Mary, it's going home time, and we both knew that. This would have been our 70th year of marriage had she lasted another 3 years, but she's been with Christ, gone to her reward. But I said, Mary, the Lord giving me strength and provision, I'm just going to keep on doing what we've always done. And I'm so glad that we have heaven before us. We all will have a reward, and it's going to be wonderful when we see Christ and we finish our race here on the earth. Now I want to talk with you a little bit about what is your attitude toward life? That would be a good subject, wouldn't it?
Oh, that's great.
And we'll just talk about that for a little while, because I want to draw attention to two people in the Bible that had different attitudes at different times. One was the Apostle Paul, and one was Solomon, called one of the wisest men of all the earth. But he got off track sometimes, and he found his way back, though, after all that he experienced. I'd like to read Ecclesiastes 2 and verse 11, if you'd like to read this with me. Ecclesiastes. There's so much in Ecclesiastes. I started to read that this afternoon. Brother Lenny mentioned I left at 1 o'clock. Well, I got up at 1 o'clock this morning, so I missed a good part of my sleeping time. But God gives us strength. And then Ecclesiastes 2:11. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought. Isn't that an amazing thing? And he said, and on the labor that I had labored to do, a lot of works, a lot of labor, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And then I want to read what Paul had to say in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 6 through 8. He said, I'm now ready to be offered. The time of my departure is at hand. He said, I've fought a good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not only to me only, but he said, unto all those that love his appearing. We love his appearing, don't we? That's going to get us out of here one of these days, and we're going to enjoy that. Jesus said, in the Word, he said, when we see him, we will be as he is. We're going to have a glorified body. no more pains, no more sickness, no more trouble, no more loneliness, no more hard work and sweating and breaking a sweat and all that goes with that. I had a vision here a while back. I don't go into visions. A lot of people have a lot of visions. To me, a vision is like a dream. The only thing is you're awake when you have a vision. And my wife had more visions than I did, and that was God's divine plan. But I've had certain ones, and they were so full of meaning. And I was lying in my bed about 11 o'clock at night after a long day, and someone kind of marvels. I have a daily radio broadcast. I've had it for 62 years. I measured one time, it was 18,000 and some sermons, and I stopped counting. I thought, that's enough. I'll just won't do that anymore, count anymore. But anyway, God, I used to hear radio preachers from out of Texas somewhere, and they would say, if I don't hear from you this week, I'll go off the air. And I told the Lord, I said, Lord, I don't want to beg that way. I want to trust you. And I don't know how you're going to arrange this, but I'm willing to be a voice. And I'll go wherever you want me to go. And you can have my body a hand at a time, an arm at a time, or the whole thing. I'll be yours. But I don't want this begging and pleading. And so I would hear them. And so 62 years ago, when I started in radio ministry, the Lord has arranged it where all the radio programs I'm heard over, I don't pay nothing. They put me on for free. And I think that's amazing. And I couldn't have, I call it divine favor. I don't know what you call it. It's provision, and it's a wonderful thing that I don't have to carry that burden, you know. And some places in Africa, and I'll have preachers from that nation take care of the mail. So all I do is preach the sermon every day, and I've got people that assemble it with some songs, and so we're getting the gospel out. That's the important thing. We're getting the gospel out. I asked the manager of the big station in my city, I'm on half-hour Sunday morning, 9 to 9:30, and it would cost over $300 on that station. Goes out to about 3 or 4 states. And I said, sir, I appreciate you handling this all these years for me. And I said, no charge. And I said, I just am curious, why do you do this? I didn't want him to stop, but I said, I just was curious. And he said, well, Reverend said you're an icon. So I had to go home and look in the dictionary, find out what an icon was. I just thought it was just God's favor. You know, He's good to us, isn't He? He's good to all of us. I've been down, but not out. In the Marines, Brother Lenny and I are, we can say Semper Fi, always faithful. I had 8 years with the Marines before I've had 65 years full-time ministry. I've never tried to wear 2 hats. I wouldn't know how. But anyway, I give God praise for that. So what am I subject? What is your attitude toward life? We ought to be able to talk about that a little bit. And I'd like to begin my little message today by asking every one of you, what is your attitude toward life? what is your dominant attitude? That's a big question. And one's attitude toward life is a matter of eternal moment. Why do you conceive to be the answer to the fact that you're here on earth? I know that it will terminate one of these days. Either the rapture will happen, or maybe I'll just go away. You know, you don't have to get sick to die. Isn't that right? Oh, I was going to tell you about this. I didn't tell you about the vision, did I? You know, there was an old couple driving. She was driving the car, and he was there, and policeman caught them for speeding, and he pulled up and said, "Where are you going in such a rush?" And this old fellow said, "You know, we was rushing to get where we're going because we might forget where we were going." They had a little dementia, I guess, and so I'm glad. I sometimes I don't have that, but sometimes I get to talking and I forget my place where I get let off here. But I was praying at night as I do, and I was crying out to God, "Lord, I just want to be close to you. I want you to be the Lord of my life and visit me." And I was feeling the power of God in my body just mightily. And then I got my mind on Mary. I have a picture of her near my bed. I thought, "Mary, what are you doing up there? What all's going on?" And suddenly, while I was awake, she appeared. She was about this far off from where she wasn't standing on the floor. I didn't see that. But she had the most beautiful garment, white and gold, and I don't even have vocabulary to describe things like that. But she had looked to be about 35 years old. All that old was rolled away, and she said, "It's wonderful here." And she could say it only as Mary could say that to me. And so I got excited, and I felt like I was almost levitating out of my body. Now, you may not have had an experience like that, but trust me, it's wonderful. Don't be afraid. And so then suddenly Jesus appeared, and he said, in the voice that only Jesus would have, he said, "Son, you can come now." And here I was feeling like, almost like going. And he said, "You can come now." And then there was a pause. And then he said, "Or you can finish the work that I have given you to do." And then he went away, Mary went away, and here I am trying to do the work that God has assigned me. Isn't that amazing? Now, you may not even believe that story I told you, but I was awake. And I said to myself, "Hey, that wasn't a dream. That was a vision." And it was a spiritual vision, you know. I'm not trying to say he was there on the floor. No. However he appeared to me, it was him, the real thing. It was her. And it was wonderful. Well, so Jesus reminds us he has a plan for every life. It may be large, it may be small, it may be brave, it may be humble, but he said, "To every man his work, to every man his work." Now that puts responsibility on me. It puts responsibility on you. Here, the singers, "To every woman her work, to every man his work." What a wonderful thing. We are called of God. This isn't something where we can just go to church wherever we want to and float around. Some people just do that all the time. They don't get established, and that's their That's their way. But we've got a job to do, a particular job. I asked my wife, we'd been married 65 years. I said, Mary, in your memory, do you think we've ever been out of the will of God at all? We planted churches. We planted 100 churches in Haiti, but we planted 12 other ones in the Midwest. And we also helped start the Topeka Rescue Mission, which is a large organization, and they're doing very, very well the last, since 1952. And they're a big concern and a big operation. But I asked her, I said, do you feel we've ever been out of the will of God? She said, no. Because we was in hard places, we refused to give up. We was with lack, without money, but we just kept on serving. See, God, sooner or later, you get behind or get in a hard place, He'll smooth it out for you. Just trust Him. Just trust Him. He won't fail you. The Bible says He can never fail. He loves you, even when you've been kind of bad, maybe sometime. Most of us have at some point failed the Lord in some way, and so He loves us. He keeps loving on us because love draws us back into the place where we can be that useful vessel. So He doesn't say to every man a work or to every woman a work, but to every man his work and to every woman her work. You are appreciated here by this pastor. I know that you are, and by the elders that help lead the destiny of Spirit of Life Church. I know that you are greatly loved, and I know that as of tonight, you're going to love on Glenda more than you ever have, because when she is not here, it isn't just the same. I mean, ask the pastor. And so, not trying to get you to feel sorry for nobody, because I just know that everybody has a place, and we want to stay in our place. So have you found God's plan for you? God has a plan for every life. It's not a matter of chance that one of us are here today. I'm so glad to be here. I just feel as good as if I had 1,000 people here, because God makes us that way. You may just have a word that'll lighten somebody's load. It's true. You might be amazed what a smile will do, what a little handshake will do, or what a letter will do. All of us have something that we can contribute for the cause of Christ. So have you found out the work that God would have you to do? The great important matter is your attitude toward life. That's what I'm going to talk to you about just a few minutes. I won't bore you and preach like I was going to an hour and a half. No, I'm just teasing you there. Okay, so what are you thinking about life, and what is your attitude toward life? I've read two men, their attitude toward life, and briefly today, I want us to think together about the attitude toward life of these two that I've mentioned, Solomon in the Old Testament and Paul in the New. And through the years, Solomon made disastrous abuse of life. Now, I was challenged by a college student some time back. I was talking about Ecclesiastes and Solomon, and he'd been taught the life of Solomon was always a perfect life, and there was no flaw in him because of the great wisdom that he had. And I said, well, I beg to differ with you. I know he got right towards the end. I know he started out right, and I know he got right with at the end because of what he said at the end of the journey. But I said, this man really made some messes out of his life. Hundreds of wives from all different nations that were there. And you know that isn't right, don't you? I just had one. That's enough. I'm happy. And I felt like I'll just stay the course because I wanted her to live longer. I loved her so dearly. And if anyone ever had a love affair, we could read each other's thoughts. You know, it was wonderful, live. And so one of the most cynical pessimists, I call him a pessimist now just for a space of time, one of the greatest one the world's ever seen, and finally he was recovered out before his day was gone. For many years his plight was wretched beyond words. I want to read that again, verse 11 of Ecclesiastes 2. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. That was this man that this young college student thought just had it down perfect. No, he said it was vexation. And when these words were written, Solomon was right in the midst of his heyday of his life and in the midst of his worldly surroundings. And his words reveal his spirit and his attitude toward life during this period of time. How different was the Apostle Paul? Now, he was a terrible man when Jesus met him on the Damascus Road. He struck him down as Saul was committing to destroying the church and Christians, causing suffering and imprisonment. And I'll tell you, when the Lord dealt with him, struck him down, struck him blind on a Damascus road, and all he could say when he was struck blind, "Who art thou, Lord?" And he said, "I'm Jesus, the one that you persecuted." See, if you get persecution, it affects Jesus. It's him being persecuted. See, he's cushioning this for you. He's not going to let it destroy you. It's going to make you stronger. Every time that I have had persecution, and I have to say it's mild, I don't want to go through a lot of persecution, but God will give us the will to stay true to him when, well, if your good is evil spoken of, or if one way that I hear people cursing, and that offends me greatly. That's persecution. I know it must offend our Lord. Anyway, he said, the time of my departure is at hand. I've fought a good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. Wouldn't you like to have just faith like that? I know there's a crown of righteousness laid up for me, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but to all those that love his appearing. What a contrast between the life of Solomon and Paul as he became known. Solomon was in the grip of dark despair and pessimism for a period of time, and then finally he got on track, and here was Saul brought out of pessimism into a real attitude toward life for that day. For years and years, Solomon was, for the most part, self-centered in his life. He said, it was my work, the things my hands had done. You know, I just feel like all glory ought to go to God. You know, if somebody had accused me of preaching a good sermon, well, I don't know that they do that. I get radio mail, and people invariably, they'll say, we're members of the Catholic Church in our community, and that's our church, but we're getting something, Reverend, from your radio ministry that we don't get in our church. I call that a good day, don't you? So here, briefly, I want to observe Solomon's personal life and his paces. He said, I have tried all of it. He was a learned man. He was called the wisest man of his day. And he was, the Bible said, called him a preacher in the very first verse. Do you notice that? The first chapter, the first verse, to the preacher, calling him preacher. And, so he was an author, and he searched near and far and delved into all sources to get information, but he came back and said it was all weariness of his flesh. You ever had your flesh weary? Before I got on the plane this morning, I had driven 800 miles from Alabama to Topeka, Kansas. I'd driven down there and back. I had a 3-day meeting where the Lord done some wonderful works, and where I was able to witness. But I get weariness of the flesh. I'll be 90 my birthday, and so my daughters said when I was going to drive that 800-mile stretch, said, Dad, you're not going alone, are you? I said, yes, I've done it all my life. I come and go, but people have a tendency to worry. I don't want them to love me that much to worry about me. Just pray for me and say, have a good day, have a wonderful day. So there he devoted himself to pleasantries and pleasures. He gave full rein to his eye, and he looked on the evils, the Bible said, and the pleasures that men have in this world, and he turned to sensual things which are self-destroying. He turned to drink. The Bible said he learned that wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whoever is deceived thereby is not wise. So he came down off of that. So what folly there is in drinking and drugs and madness. He followed all the pleasures, and then he came back and said, all is vanity, and is all vexation of spirit. Now, if you wonder why I've got notes, I used notes as a young man. I started out preaching, and I've had, I think I had 7 tents, and sometimes a tornado would take them away. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, and we were out of there by the mercy of God. But for years, I preached with tents, going to a city, plant a church, and have it up for a few months, build a church, and then go to another place. That was the way Mary and I were directed so many years. So I had an old preacher. I'd preach just extemporaneous. I'd come down. I got a lot of people saved. I'd walk down aisle, lead people to the Lord, and help encourage them when they were hesitant. And an old preacher told me, he was about my age, and he said, Brother Max, he said, you don't use any notes. I said, no, I didn't. I said, well, I just thought that's the way God was leading me, so I could have liberty. And he said, well, I did that for years as a young man, but he said, now I got old, and he said, all of my notes are gone because I didn't have them. and all of those messages. He'd think about a message he'd like to remember and had notes. So I started making some notes. Sometimes I don't use them, but sometimes I do reference those notes to keep me on target here. So here in his old age, Solomon became conscious of the fact that he was a citizen of two worlds, here and the hereafter. And it was then that he said in the last chapter, the last verses of Ecclesiastes, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. He said, you fear God and you keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Now that's our duty. It's to fear God. We have a society out here, 5 men on the Supreme Court have imposed upon America same-sex marriage. What a horrible thing. 2 men and 2 women. From the beginning it wasn't so, and whatever God said in the beginning, it's still so, and we better hold to that. Somebody said, what if somebody would ask you to marry them? No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that at all. I'd put myself in the hands of God. You protect me, you deliver me if there's a penalty for it, because I don't intend to have a part in that. Just cannot do it. And then he was recovered by the power of God before his day, and he said, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. He said, fear God. See, he'd had all of those lustful things, and no telling how much was put in his hands, billions, maybe millions or billions of dollars of value, and he had anything he could imagine. And now the Bible says you're going to go somewhere to another world, and you're not going to take anything with it. He himself said, you came into this world naked like a little baby, and that's the way you're going to go. Of course, I want them to put my suit or clothes on me when they appear in the casket if I'm not lost at sea. You know, it's all up to the Lord. I'm willing whatever price God has for me. I don't want to ask for trouble. I don't want to ask for hardship. But when we belong to the Lord, we want him to have his say and have his way. Now, Paul, in closing, he started out unbeliever in Christ and Christianity. You talk about ISIS. Yeah, he was like that. Chopping block, probably, all of that. I'll tell you, they're going to meet God. There's nobody going to get by killing Christians and get away with it. Somebody will have to pay a price. And we don't need vengeance. We don't ask for vengeance. God said, vengeance is mine, I will repay. Yeah. You know, even Saul, when God called him after all of that abuse to the believers, Jesus said, I'm going to show him what great things he's going to have to suffer for my sake. You know, he's abused my people, and he's going to get a taste of that as my child. I'm going to make some arrangements. And you talk about things that Paul suffered, is quite a long list, a big list. He was with false brothers. He thought he could surely count on them, not a false one. And all the long list, shipwreck at sea, beaten with stripes. He got some real taste of it, and that was just to let him know this is what evildoers do, and yet God delivered him out of it all. And he had said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And from that hour, he obeyed Christ, no matter how hard it was. Are you willing with your life, no matter how hard it gets? You may have to pray an extra hour a day just for people you love. They're hurting. They're hurting. I take all my troubles to the Lord, but I have times I hurt and I ache. I've got a container. I was telling Brother Lenny, I've got a 40-foot container. We've had 9 this year that we've shipped out, humanitarian goods, to people that had lost everything. I've sent medical equipment. I've just really worked hard and led the people. I didn't know where a dime was coming, because in 65 years, I've never had a salary. That's another thing people don't know about me, but I started out with the Lord, and I said, Lord, I don't want a promise of a salary. I don't think of retirement. Oh, I get my Social Security. But the thing of it is, the churches I planted, I never had a salary. It's just something between the Lord and me. I'm trusting Him fully. And, you know, God makes us different. All of us are different, every one of us. There's some women that would be so insecure if they had been married to a fellow like me. But that's the way God made me. That's the way God led me. And I'm trusting Him today. And it's amazing to me. I have no reserve. I told Brother Lenny, I said, it's taken everything, all of this, but God, some way, will just speak. And I don't understand it, only it works. And I'd rather, well, you have your work here. You're trusting Him. It's the same principle. This pastor, probably there's not a day goes by. He and some of you, you're crying out to God, Lord, just help us do more, help us to reach more. So he said, Lord, what is it you would have me to do? And then I want to mention here in closing how vastly important for you and I is our attitude toward life. We are eternity bound. I know that 10 years from now, if the Lord tarries, probably 40% of our pastors will be no more. 10, 15 years. They're getting older and so forth. And time is just about up for many of them. And so their attitude towards life, no matter how hard it is, some are in difficult places and hard places. And Paul said, he concluded, he said, for me to live is Christ. That's what it's all about. My coming out here, I wanted to, when the hurricane shut down the airports, I had to reschedule my trip. As soon as I get back, I've got to head again to Haiti. But what a wonderful thing to be with Brother Lenny and to see you and to be at this church that's been a blessing. And then, of course, to see a few others perhaps that I haven't met. But he said, for me to live is Christ. That is the conclusion. He said, I'm now ready. I'm ready, Lord. He wasn't afraid of death. He's now ready. Are you ready? Well, say, Brother Mang, don't get up a load tonight. I got a few business things to take care of. Someone wrote a song, would you live for Jesus and be always pure and good? Would you walk with Him within the narrow road? Would you have Him bear your burdens, carry all your load? Let Him have His way with you. His power will make you what you ought to be. His blood will cleanse you and set you free. That's a wonderful song. Mary used to sing that. And I just want to say this. I was called by the family and by the beloved husband of whose name was Glenn Broadus, and his wife would have been married 70 years this year also. And we knew them a long time. She used to lead singing in churches where we would maybe plant a church. But now his wife didn't know anybody for 4 days. Her mouth, when I walked into the home, and her mouth was open, her eyes were set. You've seen people like that were passing. Her eyes were open, but they were set. And for 4 days. And I listened for breathing, just barely a little breathing. And Glenn was standing there beside me, and I put my arm around him, and his daughter was there. And I said, Brother Glenn, have you given Mary to Jesus? You know, sometimes God waits for you to say, all right, it's okay. It's okay if you want her, go ahead. I had to come to that with my mother, with my wife. And that's that's sometimes hard for people. And so I said to Glenn, Glenn, have you said, Lord, you can have her? And he said, I just now said it, Brother Manning. And here's what happened. Suddenly, a smile came on her face. Her mouth was closed. Her eyes closed and open and looked like pure joy, and then she was gone. I don't understand that. I tell you, this is not the last of miracles. You're going to need some miracles on your journey. You just need to press in and trust Him. He is your all in all. He's everything. He's everything to you. He's everything. And churches go up and down. Don't give it a thought. You stay faithful to God. And trials will come and go. Stay faithful to God. You'll have want, and you'll have needs, and you'll have hurts. I was telling Brother Lenny this evening, we got a church, probably 500 or 700 people in Jeremy. A roof tore off here with this hurricane, and we quickly were able to get the roof back on, and it gave hope to the people. They didn't have money. You take an offering in a Haitian church, you won't even get $7. They don't have nothing. And that's why I believe God has kept me there for 55 years. I've traveled to other countries and seen wonderful things, but God has kept me. You know, you have to stay with the tiller. Whatever your burden is, that's your work. You need to discover that. Whatever your burden is. You may say, I may have a burden for you, Brother Lenny. You're my pastor. I have a burden for you. Well, that's your work. Support him. Encourage him. Whatever, the Lord lays on your heart. So